I've spoken about a number of Sodor's railways and branch lines over the course of this series of videos, but one that I haven't really mentioned in depth is the Peel Godred branch line.
Is it electric?
Why, yes it is. The Peel Godred branch is the only electric line on Sodor, and thus is home to a number of electric engines. The book Sodor Reading Between the Lines confirms that in the modern day, the trains are handled by engines of the class 86 and 87, and the railway safety book More Bad Days for Thomas and His Friends shows an engine resembling a class 91. However, it's worth noting that the 86s weren't built until the 1960s, with the other two classes being even newer than that. The branch line itself was first opened in the 1920s, long before any of these engines existed, and so there must have been an earlier set of engines running the line before the current roster. We don't know what these engines would have looked like, but with a drawing tablet and a drawing app, anything is possible. The first question when designing these engines was, what should they be based on? The primary user of overhead electric locomotives in the UK at the time was the North Eastern Railway. However, it's worth noting that the railway's larger electric engines were built at the railway's own Darlington works, and thus couldn't be bought by just anyone. The EF1 and EB1 remained in use until 1951 and 1964 respectively, but the EE1, of which there was only one produced, was withdrawn in 1923 and stored until 1950, at which point it was scrapped. Its withdrawal date could line up with the Peel Godred line's opening. However, I personally believe that the EE1 was likely too big for what the NWR needed. The NER's other electric engine was the ES1. These were outsourced to British Thomson Houston and the Brush Locomotive Works. So I put that class into consideration. Given that these engines work a branch line, it may make some sense for them to be small. However, it's worth noting that their top speed is a mere 27 miles an hour. Ultimately, I came to the decision that the Peel Godred engines should share their DNA with industrial electric locomotives, first built by Siemens of Germany in the Edwardian era for the Harton Coal Company, with later examples being built by a variety of British manufacturers. It's possible that the NWR approached one of these companies to build a set of electric locos of a bespoke design for mixed traffic branch line work, resulting in something that maybe looks like a cross between the Harton locomotives and the EF1. The first two engines on the line were Eli and his sister Electra. They arrived on Sodor in 1922 in preparation for the opening of the line. Now, it's often theorised that in the North Western Railway's earlier years, blue was the colour for passenger engines, whereas red was the colour for mixed traffic engines. So I'm thinking that the two engines probably entered service in a red livery. Despite their official status as mixed traffic engines, Eli and Electra are primarily goods engines. They would deliver trains of coal to the power station and, once the Sodor Aluminium Company was established, they would bring trains of aluminium oxide to their works. General goods and mail trains were also their responsibility. On top of this, during the early days of the line, they would handle passenger trains. Eli has something of an electric personality. Lively, charismatic and a bit rebellious. He's interested in technology and gets excited about technological advancements even if he doesn't fully understand them. His driver would sometimes let Eli listen to his portable radio, and when television became the hot new thing, Eli was keen to learn more about it, often asking station staff about the latest TV shows and the like. With all that said, here is the finished picture. Electra is Eli's identical twin sister. Personality-wise, she has some similarity to her brother in that they are both interested in technology and electricity. But since Electra was technically the first of the two to be completed, she considers herself to be the responsible older sibling, despite the two engines being ordered at the same time. She has a tendency to boss Eli around and not listen to his advice, while also giving him advice that he didn't ask for. This side of her personality will often get her into trouble, almost as often as Eli's rebellious nature gets him into trouble. It's worth noting that whilst the two engines have quite lively personalities, they will often only open up around the people and engines they're close with. They have a tendency to mask when around people and engines they don't know or only know a little. To the Peel Godred engines, the steam engines are casual acquaintances at best, and so have a tendency to behave a bit flatly when around them. This gives the impression to most of the steam engines that they are dull and lack personality, even though this isn't necessarily the case. An exception to this rule is the Coldy Fell engines, which the electric engines are quite friendly with. I've painted Electra into a green livery. Like I said before, the two engines were originally both red, but in the days before the NWR began numbering their engines, this caused some problems. The two engines were often mistaken for one another, particularly in the early days when most of the railwaymen didn't quite understand electric engines. They were used to being around steam engines and didn't quite understand the ins and outs of these newfangled locomotives. This annoyed Eli and Electra, who were quite proud of their individuality. Furthermore, the fact that they were hard for the layman to distinguish made it easy for mistakes to occur. Engines would sometimes get directed to the wrong station platform, or the drivers would enter the cab of the wrong engine, etc. The decision was ultimately taken to give the engines different colour schemes, and Electra chose green. Eli and Electra were withdrawn from regular service around the mid-1960s to late 1970s, when two engines resembling the Class 86 and 87 were brought in to do the majority of the line's goods work. However, they were preserved and are sometimes brought out of retirement for heritage rail tours. I like to think that Peel Godred has a museum of science and technology, and that these two engines can normally be seen there. And so, here is the completed illustration. After a few years of running the railway on their own, Eli and Electra were beginning to feel overworked. The decision was soon made to order another engine for the branch line's passenger services. This responsibility once again came into the hands of English Electric, who built a locomotive that somewhat resembled an ED50, a design that he had previously built for the Japanese National Railways a few years earlier. Emmett wasn't identical to the ED50, not least because he was built to run on standard gauge lines. His arrival on the railway meant that Eli and Electra could focus primarily on the goods trains, which they were more suited for anyway. Emmett was painted in the NWR's passenger blue livery, which made him look very smart. However, his status as only passenger engine on the branch line made him a little conceited. He looked down on the two goods engines, which annoyed them considerably. This didn't stop Emmett from showing off, however, and he would sometimes get Eli to fetch his coaches for him. "Passengers are important. It's only fair that a lowly goods engine like yourself takes the time to assist me." One day, after getting fed up of being ordered about by this big blue bully, Eli handled Emmett's coaches so roughly that he managed to put them in a foul mood. Emmett's train was going smoothly until the coaches slipped their brakes on, leading Emmett's train to stop in an isolated part of the line, far from any station. The brake pipes on the coaches were badly damaged, so Electra was called to deliver the tools to mend them. When she heard about how Emmett treated Eli, she was furious. "Even I don't treat Eli as badly as that," she said. Eventually, both Eli and Emmett were given a severe telling off, but the station staff were wise to the fact that Emmett had started the whole kerfuffle, and so it was he who was punished for his crimes. For the next few weeks, Eli was put exclusively on passenger duties, whilst Emmett did Eli's goods work. Emmett was not as well versed with goods trains as Eli. In fact, he wasn't well versed with goods trains at all. So he had his fair share of accidents at first, but over time he mellowed out and got to know the ins and outs of goods work. He still acts pompous and vain at times, but he shunts his own trains and helps out with the goods work when needed. The ED50s had a door on the front, and so I've given Emmett a grey face. I know this theory isn't perfect, I've seen the Boko edits, but in general I think it's a decent rule to follow in a more general sense. I've shown Emmett and Eli at Peel Godred station. Peel Godred is a walled town, and so I was looking up terminus stations in walled towns for inspiration. In the end, I loosely based the scene on Annex Station in Northumberland, which was also a branch line terminus. Trains don't run there anymore, but the station still exists as a second-hand bookshop. I've been there before, but I didn't buy anything, it was too expensive for me. It's worth noting that Audrey himself never wrote about the Peel Godred engines because he felt that electric engines were devoid of personality. Though to counter this, I've decided to draw some sparks emitting from Eli's pantograph just to show how angry he is. Emmett's workload has dwindled significantly since the arrival of the Class 91 on Sodor, which happened sometime between 1988 and 2001. He's still around, however, as a spare engine, although at this point he's primarily seen hauling rail tours and photo charters. And so, here is the completed image. I've decided to do something a bit different with the fourth engine. Similar to when I based Albert on a French design because I thought it looked cool, I've decided to base this engine on the Class D, an electric engine that ran on the Swedish State Railways, or Statens Järnvägar, or SJ for short. I just think they look really interesting, particularly the early examples with the wooden body. It's worth pointing out that a lot of the official lore about Sodor's railways is the result of Audrey seeing or reading about an engine or a railway and thinking, "Wow, that's so cool, I really want to write a story about this," and then coming up with a plausible backstory as to how something similar ended up on Sodor. So I suppose it's only right to do something similar with this engine. All the other Peel Godred engines at this point were articulated Bobo designs, but sometime during the 1930s the Fat Controller was interested in seeing whether or not there was any merit to rigid-framed electric engines. He discussed this with various British loco builders, but they weren't really interested, preferring to focus their research and resources into articulated engines. Siemens was a no-go due to rising tensions between Germany and the Allied countries, and so the decision was made to contact Allmänna Svenska Elektriska Aktiebolaget, ASEA, to build a rigid-framed locomotive similar to the Class D they'd built for SJ. Erlund, for that was the engine's name, entered service around 1936. He was a mixed traffic engine in the truest sense of the word, and could theoretically pull anything. At first he was tasked with helping out Emmett with the passenger trains. Erlund was excited to pull some trains, maybe a little too excited for his own good. Due to his rigid frame, he couldn't take corners as quickly as the other engines, and derailed on a sharp bend coming out of Peel Godred station. For a period he was put on freight duties, during which he made a concerted effort to be more careful whilst traversing the tighter turns. He was soon back to passenger duties, and later received a rebuild at Crovan's Gate Works which allowed him to reach speeds of up to 75 miles an hour, allowing him to travel higher speeds on straighter stretches of line where he can see ahead and not have to worry as much about losing balance. The arrival of the Class 91 meant that Erlond has had less to do in recent years, but he still exists as a spare engine, often filling in when other engines are ill or away for repairs. I've drawn Erlond at Abbey Holt, which serves the local boys' school. Erlond is a favourite engine of the school children, who enjoy the fast pace of his trains. Nevertheless, Erlond is always sure to be as careful as he can. I've retained a varnished wooden body that most of the D-classes had earlier on. Out of context, this might look like another one of my combining random engines videos, since this kind of looks like the secret love child of Toby and Etienne. I've made a couple of differences to Erlond versus the other D-classes. Firstly, the positioning of his headlamps were altered in order for him to display British head codes. Secondly, rather than the red diagonal guards below his buffer beam, I've given him the same grey U-shaped guards that the other Peel Godred engines have. And here is the completed picture. And there you have it, the original engines of the Peel Godred branch, according to me. It was really interesting drawing a whole new type of engine that I've never really given the time of day before. I've got newfound appreciation for early electric locomotives. Despite what some may say, I think they've got a lot of character. At some point I may draw the more modern engines that came in to replace these four, so be sure to subscribe and comment down below if you want to see that video and others like it.